Hello and welcome once again. As you most likely guessed based on what you're seeing on your screen, today's video will cover the sales process. Now, some of you may already be thinking, sales process? Does there really need to be a process? Isn't sales really about just picking up the phone and pushing the product? Well, yes, sort of, but any successful salesperson, whether they are really conscious of it or not, is actually following some sort of process. I mean, no one just picks up the phone and says, "Hey, I'm Joe with Ted's Widgets. Want to buy something?" After all, whether we're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, fixing a car, or taking a part in the judicial process, one way or the other, if we're expecting a positive outcome, we should always be following some sort of process or set of procedures. So, the goal today is to introduce a helpful, non-cumbersome sales process designed specifically to help you turn your prospects into delighted BKE customers. Okay, great. So let's look at the steps. Tell you what, let's walk through each one of them quickly and then we'll set about exploring each in detail. So here we go. As we can see, establish rapport is going to be our step one. Now, to be sure, you know from experience, and we have already learned in a previous video, that people like to do business with those that they trust and like. So, quite logically, the first step in our sales process is establishing rapport. See, not so painful. Let's move on. Step two, the agenda. And this makes sense too, right? I mean, think about it. Anytime you're invited to a meeting, what's your first question? Well, what's the meeting about? Likewise, telling your prospect what to expect will put them more at ease and help them follow you more easily as you move through your presentation. Step three is all about identifying pain points. Arguably, this is the most important step in the process. Why? Because if you don't know what hurts, you can't possibly fix it. Consider this. What if you were to visit a physician because you were having intense migraines? Would you want that physician to just start throwing random cures at you? Or would you rather have her ask you precisely what is the nature of your ailment? Moving through the remaining steps, as you could see, in step 4, we'll discuss how we can help the client to envision change, and in doing so, attempt to get that prospect to begin to see in their mind's eye the benefits thereof. We will then talk about step 5, which has to do with presenting a well-customized BKE solution. And we'll wrap up by walking through the last 3 steps, which entail discussing the investment decision, outlining the onboarding process, and finally the all-important sales close. Sound reasonable? Great. Okay then, let's dig in and talk a bit more about step 1. Establishing rapport. Well, to begin with, having studied the Principles of Persuasion videos, parts 1 and 2, we are already experts in using Cialdini's 6 weapons of influence. And it so happens the majority of these have everything to do with establishing a strong rapport with a prospect. Let's briefly review some of those concepts now, beginning with reciprocity. As you recall, when we make an offering of some kind or another to another person, they feel obligated to return the favor. We could leverage this principle as a means of establishing rapport by providing some sort of offering, a gift, a concession, or some other sort of good turn to our prospect right up front. We also learned from our study of Cialdini that people respond to those that are consistent in their behavior and that honor their commitments. Therefore, another great way to build rapport is to do likewise. Keep your demeanor during your intercourse with your prospect consistent and balanced, and by all means, follow through with any commitments you have made. Without spending too much time here, let's just briefly talk about 2 more especially helpful Cialdini principles. The first of which, and one which is probably the most important when it comes to establishing a strong relationship, is liking. Indeed, study after study has consistently shown that people respond to and are most easily influenced by those they like. And what factors tend to most effectively promote liking? Well, as you'll recall, there are 3: attractiveness, compliments, and similarity. That's right. As you remember, attractive people do have a leg up in terms of having people like and respond to them. And so I guess the only thing we could sort of say here is, well, if you got it, flaunt it. More in our control, however, is our ability to use compliments to attract others. Yes, I know it's hard not to be skeptical, but science has proven definitively that compliments do work, so use them. By the way, have I told you how good you look today? Anyway, the third pillar of liking is, that's right, similarity. People like to do business with and tend to like those with whom they have something in common. And this is a big one. Unquestionably, and to an almost absurd degree, we as humans tend to like people that are like ourselves. So whether it is a school you might have in common with a prospect, a sports team each of you happen to fancy, the fact that you have the same number of kids, or your mutual affinity for collecting Beatles memorabilia, identify something that you and your prospect have in common and highlight it. Okay, and quickly and finally, authority. Yet another of Cialdini's principles. Suffice to say, if you can establish yourself and BKE as a leader that is an authority in terms of providing superior service and solutions, you are well on your way to establishing a sound rapport with your client, or soon-to-be client. Okay, step 1 down, let's talk about step 2, setting the agenda. As we said, setting an agenda with your prospect right up front helps facilitate the rest of the exchange. I mean, even at your kid's junior high band recital, they give you a program, which is really nothing more than an agenda. Could you imagine the agony of not having the program to follow at one of these things? You might start to believe the hellish thing will never be over. Anyway, okay, so here on your screen, you'd find a typical agenda. Looks straightforward, right? Tell them who you are, tell them what we do, why we're great, how to migrate to our platform, and set up a date for a follow-up. Easy, right? Maybe not. Here's why. Well, for starters, that agenda couldn't be less client-focused. Look at it. It's all about us, us, us. And that is a surefire way to annihilate the wonderful rapport we've worked so hard to establish. Furthermore, before proposing a knee-jerk sort of agenda, wouldn't you think it might be a better idea to engage in a bit of the following? First, for example, determine your call or your meeting's objective. Are you interested in closing the sale today? Or maybe is your objective simply to get another meeting, perhaps with a more senior person? You might also want to think about your various sales tactics and make sure they suit the situation at hand. We certainly want to establish a time frame. How much time do we have, and how much time does the prospect have to spend with us today? And of course, we always want to start with the end in mind. And what that means is establishing for yourself what must happen by the close of the meeting for it to have been a success. Only once we think about these matters can we propose an agenda which might ultimately look something more like this. Note that right off the bat, we're establishing a time frame for the meeting. Next, and more importantly, the agenda is client-centric. Look at the headings. This meeting is not about us, but rather about our prospect, their business, their accounting. And only then do we even think about the matter of how BKE might be able to customize a solution, especially for them. You will also note, and this too is of the utmost importance, that there in the agenda is a placeholder setting aside some time for prospect feedback. As you know, a lot of prospects do not like to give you real-time feedback because they feel nervous or think you might somehow pressure them. However, when you suggest right up front that you will be seeking their feedback and accepting your agenda, which the prospect will do 99% of the time, they're making a commitment, consciously or otherwise, that they will give you feedback at the appropriate time. And as we know from Cialdini, people tend to meet their commitments. Okay, now let's proceed to the next step, identifying pain points. Referring back to our proposed agenda, as you are questioning the prospect about themselves, their business, and their accounting process, you are of course at the same time attempting to identify your prospect's pain points. But how exactly is that done? Well, let's take a page directly from the annals of counseling psychology. When a therapist sits down with a client, what is he or she attempting to understand? Well, the nature, source, and the extent of their client's discomfort, right? And how do they go about this most typically? Well, they ask, they listen, they provide empathic feedback so that the patient knows they are listening attentively and understanding what they are being told. Once they have gleaned a bit of information, they probe at certain issues that might be of particular interest. They process the new information and start the process all over again. And so if you think about it, if we really want to be of service to our prospects, we essentially need to step into the role of business therapist, at least insofar as our need to assess the nature, source, and extent of our prospect's discomfort. All right then, let's quickly have a look at each of these techniques: ask, listen, empathize, probe, and process, and talk about what is involved at each phase. So let's start with ask. We ask the prospect about themselves, their business, and their accounting systems. But when we do so, it is critical that we ask only open-ended questions. Why? Because we want the prospect to tell us what is really going on in their minds. Here are a few examples of the types of open-ended questions you might want to try. First one being, tell me about your business. You might then ask, what are your business goals, short and long term? What are the key drivers of your business, factors that sort of make or break your success? Maybe you could ask the client to talk about their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You could also talk about what sort of constraints the prospect feels like they're under. Then moving to the accounting function, you could ask such questions as, how do you manage your accounting function now? How do you address payroll? How do you use the information that comes from your accounting system? And of course, there's always the age-old question, what keeps you up at night? Okay, coming back to our pain point detection tool, as we can see, the next step is about listening. Look, it's pretty simple. If we're asking questions and not listening carefully to the answers, if we're merely zoning out until it's time to ask the next question, this entire exercise is moot. So listen. Listen with your ears and listen with your gut. Try to pick up on both content and emotion. Do this and you will be well on your way to uncovering those mission-critical pain points that you will be able to use down the road. And of course, as we listen, it's important that we provide a bit of empathy. And what does that really mean? Well, it begins with letting the prospect know that we're listening and that we're concerned and interested. Therapists do this by providing brief, intermittent interjections, sometimes paraphrasing or even sometimes summarizing what their client has told them. We can do the same. For example, after your prospect gives you a fairly lengthy commentary about how little time she has to focus on sales, you might paraphrase and say to your prospect, so I hear you're telling me that you got into this business because you actually love interacting with your clients as their interior designer and coming up with wonderful solutions, but instead it seems like all you do is admin. Is that right? You got it? So, on to the next. Probing. This is where you can take a bit of information you were given and seek an even better understanding of what pain points might be present or possibly explore an area that the prospect has not yet disclosed. You know, you have not mentioned it really, but so many people I speak with tell me they feel they lack access to their accounting information. Would you say this is something that troubles you? And finally, we come to data processing. And what this has to do with is the matter of how you will incorporate all that you have learned so that you can be most effective as you execute the remaining steps of the sales process. And speaking of the sales process, which indeed we'll be getting back to in just a moment, let's just talk a bit about preparation. If you want to get the most out of your engagement with your prospect, the rule of thumb is simple. The more you know about your prospect and their industry in advance, the better questions you can ask, the more you will understand, and the more you will be trusted by that prospect. And finally, the more effective you can be at identifying pain points and addressing them. So, how to prepare? Well, there are a lot of ways. You could start with, of course, reviewing your prospect's website and the website of your prospect's competitors. By all means, do a Google search to find out what might be the hot topics in the industry or what others have written about your prospect. Take a look at the information from various trade associations that might be relevant to your prospect, any analyst reports, and have a chat with those in the industry. Use your network to find out more about your prospect and/or the industry they're involved in. And finally, you might consider checking SEC filings, not necessarily for your prospect, but for companies who are in the same industry. Okay, let's now turn to step 4, envisioning change. Bottom line, if your prospect can't see the benefits of the change in his or her mind's eye, the likelihood that any action will be taken is remote. Therefore, you need to help the prospect understand that if together you can address and eliminate some of those pain points, then better times will surely follow. So, how could we accomplish this? How can we help our would-be clients to see, heck, even feel the benefits of change? Well, once again, let's get them talking. And as they do so, let's get them envisioning. Here's how we do that. Ask your prospect, so what would, say, 10 more hours of spare time do for you? Or what might be the benefit of having 24/7 access to your data? You might even ask, don't you sometimes feel like you spend time in everything but the activities you like and that make you money? All of these are the kind of questions that could get your client thinking about change and the benefits thereof. Okay, we're cruising right along, halfway through, so let's recap. We have established a great rapport with our prospect. We've set our agenda so that our prospect knows where we are heading and where in the journey they are and we are at all times. We now have a great feel for not only our prospect, but their business and their accounting system. And we have a great idea about the sources of frustration and pain. We have also engaged with our prospect so as to have them thinking about the benefits and the importance of change, and even starting to see those benefits. It is therefore time for step 5, presenting our solution. By the way, can you see the difference between this approach and what many other salespersons attempt to do? Honestly, how many salespersons have you encountered that dismiss all of what we have covered thus far, preferring instead to simply close their eyes, take a deep breath, and dive directly into offering solutions? It's really amazing. Arguably, therein lies the difference between someone in sales and you, the sales professional. So, presenting our solution. And where we are going to start is by considering BKE's value proposition. And why would you want to spend time thinking about the BKE value proposition? Well, if you think about it, our value propositions are the inverse of, and more often than not, the solution to a prospect's pain points. And here's the good news. At this stage in the process, we are well versed in our prospect's pain points. That is, they're known. And because we have reviewed the video on the BKE value proposition, or more accurately, BKE's value propositions, solutioning becomes simply a matter of matching each relevant value proposition to the associated prospect pain point. For example, if your prospect's pain point has to do with being perpetually time constrained, you can help them to understand how working with BKE can produce meaningful time savings. Similarly, when we encounter a prospect that is looking for a more cost-effective accounting, payroll, and/or merchant services alternative, surely we will share with him or her the various aspects of our cost-saving value proposition. Or finally, for that prospect that is seeking 24/7 access to real-time accurate accounting data, we have a solution for them as well. This all sounds great, right? And it is. But we must always keep the following in mind. A general rule is, the more irrelevant the features, the lower your chance of making a sale. Indeed, less is more. Tell you what, let's make it even simpler. All we are really saying here is that when it comes to proposing a solution for a prospect, be selective. One size does not fit all. If you make a proposal to a prospect that discusses every value proposition, whether relevant or not, along with a lot of technical details and other superfluous information, don't be surprised when the response you get back is less than positive. On the other hand, if we've listened carefully along the way, gained a solid knowledge of our prospect and their situation, and we are able to propose a relevant, succinct, and customized solution, more often than not, our prospect will reward us. Okay, we presented our solution, the prospect is really engaged, and then, that's right, it's time to talk about them making the investment. Now, this is a discussion that could be somewhat nerve-wracking for folks with limited sales experience, since they are fearful that after all their hard work, the prospect is going to tell them that the service is too expensive. Well, okay, that's understandable, but here's the good news. Expense has nothing to do with it. Why? Because expenses, we learned in our accounting module video, are goods and services we buy and which are consumed either immediately or over a short period of time and have no value thereafter. On the other hand, an investment is an expenditure that either is intended to appreciate or pay dividends over a period of time, and this is the very case we have here. And all you need to do to help your prospect understand this important difference is quantify. Now, mind you, many prospects may not have a problem with the price of the service. They very well might immediately understand the value and be ready to sign on the dotted line. But for those monetarily squeamish, forget the arm waving and make it simply a matter of return on investment. The fact is that the savings that BKE can offer a prospect and that prospect will realize over the course of a year or so, between time savings, discounts for payroll, discounts on merchant services, and other such benefits, will often exceed the aggregate payments due to BKE during the course of any 1 year. Honestly, think about it. Let's pretend you're a real estate agent. And let's say the average commission you earn on the sale of a house is $8,400. Given the average annual fee to BKE is likely to be in the order of $4,200, if BKE can save enough time for that prospect so they can go out and sell just one more house a year, well, that prospect or client has just received 100% return on their investment. Simple, but true. So, therefore, rule number 1 when it comes to the investment discussion, quantify. Turning back to our list, we can see that the next step concerns itself with outlining the actual onboarding process. However, because we will be covering this topic in a separate module, we're going to postpone that discussion for now and move to our last step, Step 8, the all-important close. So, what can we say about the close? Let's start with this. Okay, closing the deal is certainly not always easy, and yes, there can be a number of hurdles a salesperson must overcome, not the least of which is the fact that some prospects simply hate to make these kinds of decisions, and so many tend to procrastinate, while others, on the other hand, simply can't ever seem to decide what they want to do at all, while still others are convinced everyone is out there to cheat them and they trust no one. And then, of course, there is always those prospects that are deathly afraid of making a wrong decision. Yep, all of these dynamics are very real. So, what to do? Well, having invested some 20 minutes or so in this video, we are probably waiting for the big reveal. That is, that secret closing technique that will jettison us to the top of the sales charts and make us rich beyond our wildest dreams. Okay then, here it is. That's right. The secret to closing more business is not some mystical technique. It is the sales process itself. The very same sales process we have been discussing. After all, look at what we've done so far. If we have worked the steps properly, we have a great rapport with a prospect that likes us and therefore is inclined to do business with us. We have set a prospect-centric agenda and faithfully executed upon it, thus demonstrating the fact that indeed we do what we say. We have penetrated deeply into the prospect's business and empathically listened to their fears and concerns. We have designed a solution, not at random, but one that is specifically tailored for that prospect. We have shown the prospect that an investment in BKE will pay dividends quickly and for many years to come. So why do we need some sort of slick closing technique? If we have covered each step properly, the close should be a simple matter of logistics, right? Okay, you still want that killer closing strategy that will help you to push the deal definitively over the top. Well, okay, it just so happens that we might have just the thing you're looking for. And once again, this technique comes straight from the world of counseling psychology. What we are talking about here is something called motivational interviewing, a technique that was developed initially during the 1980s by a psychologist by the name of William Miller. And the rationale behind this strategy of motivational interviewing is that change talk tends to be associated with successful change outcomes. That is to say, when it comes to motivational interviewing, our goal is to strategically get our prospects, as opposed to ourselves, to give voice to the need for and the reason for changing. Okay, here's how it works. Once again, we gauge our prospects as follows. So, Mr. Prospect, remind me again, what would you like to change? And what makes you think you need to change, etc. We proceed with these sort of questions, and then we pull out a technique called the Readiness to Change ruler. Now, folks, stay with me here because this is pretty cool. We move to a discussion that most likely would sound something like this. So, we agreed as part of the agenda we would spend some time sharing some feedback, right? Well, I hope we have gotten some benefit from our discussion today. Client? Yes, it's been helpful. You proceed. So tell me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely were you to make any sort of near-term change to your accounting situation before our call? Client responds, maybe a 4. You continue. On that same scale, how likely are you to make a change, that is, a change incorporating the BKE solution now? Client, maybe a 7. Wait, what? 7? After all that work, the darn prospect is still at a 7? Are we stalemated? I mean, what the heck can we do now? Fear not. Believe it or not, you have your prospect exactly where you want them. You now proceed as follows. You begin again. So, it's interesting. You say you're at about a 7. Do you mind if I ask why not still a 2 or a 4 or even a 5? And now, ladies and gentlemen, a bit of motivational interviewing magic. Watch as I am about to turn a prospect into a BKE salesperson. Well, a 2 or a 5 doesn't seem right. After all, I guess I could save a bunch of money with BKE, and I would probably have a lot more time to spend on aspects of my business that I really want to focus on. Not only that, it would be great to see my cash balance and my financials on a 24/7 basis. See that? We literally figured out how to get our own prospect preaching to us about the benefits of BKE and its value propositions. Pretty cool, huh? And you thought the old rabbit out of the hat trick was cool. Well, you say, sounds to me like you're more at a 9 or a 10. Prospect. Yeah, I guess so. To which you triumphantly reply, Mr. Client, let's you and I get moving on getting all of those benefits flowing to you right now. Kindly sign here. There you go. The ultimate 1-2 punch. A great 8-step process with some excellent techniques to apply along the way. Ready to jump into that ring and show them what for? We sure are. And so, in closing, let's all just remember to follow our steps. Surely they represent the very stepping stones which will enable us as sales professionals to advance from better to best. And with that, once again, on behalf of BKE, thank you so much for your time, and as always, thanks for being a member of the BKE team.